Ever get that feeling, like the past is closer than we think? Today's deep dive is about a case that really blurs those lines. We're looking at Nemi's case UP395. It's the case of a man found in Las Vegas back in April of 72. And get this, he's remained unidentified ever since. So our mission today is to figure out how that's even possible. I mean, this is the age of DNA, high-tech forensics, right? How can someone remain a mystery for, what is it, over 50 years? And maybe, just maybe, we can uncover some clues, something that might help give this guy back his identity. All right, so 1972, Las Vegas. I know it was before the mega resorts, but what was the vibe like back then? Set the scene for us.
Think less neon oasis, more like a desert boomtown. Las Vegas in 72 was a fascinating mix. You had the excitement, of course, the casinos, the shows, but then out in the neighborhoods, it was a different story. Lots of new folks, newcomers, all trying to make their mark, mixed in with the old-timers.
So in this snapshot of time, our John Doe emerges. He was found just east of 121 S Highland Avenue. Anything stand out to you about that location?
Well, Highland Avenue back then, it was on the outskirts of the Strip, away from the glitz and glamour. Looking at the property records, it seems like it was mostly a working-class neighborhood. Single-family homes, smaller apartment buildings, that kind of thing. Wouldn't have been unusual to see people passing through, maybe looking for work or a fresh start.
He was found wearing a plaid shirt, work boots. These little details always get to me. I mean, were those everyday clothes back then, or could they be a clue about his lifestyle? You know what I mean?
It's possible. It was at a different time. And a man, especially someone who might have been transient, those clothes could have just been for practicality, for work. Here's the thing. Back then, someone found in that area dressed like that, they might have been presumed to be just passing through, not necessarily someone who had been reported missing. It's a sad reality, but a factor we can't ignore.
It really makes you think how those seemingly insignificant details, the clothes, the location, they take on a whole new meaning when you put them into context. And speaking of context, let's talk investigations. 1972, what did investigators have to work with back then?
Think pre-digital, pre-DNA. We're talking fingerprints, dental records, missing persons reports. That was pretty much it.
Okay, so pretty standard stuff, even today. What was the catch?
The limitations were huge. Fingerprints, for example, they were only useful if you had them on file somewhere. Same with dental records. You needed a match, and a dentist who kept really good records, which wasn't always the case. And missing persons reports, well, those relied on someone, somewhere, knowing that the person was actually gone, and the databases, the systems, to cross-reference all of this information. Nowhere near as sophisticated as what we have today.
So basically, they were trying to solve these cases with one hand tied behind their backs.
Pretty much. And you have to remember, this is Las Vegas. People coming and going all the time. The odds of someone slipping through the cracks were even higher back then.
It makes you wonder how many John and Jane Does are out there from that era. Their identities just lost to time. But that's where things get really interesting, right? Because today, we've got tools they couldn't even dream of back in 72. It's like we're talking about two completely different worlds. 1972 with its limitations, and now with technology that feels like it's straight out of Star Trek. So what do investigators have in their arsenal today that could break open a case like this one?
One word: DNA. Specifically, genetic genealogy.
Okay, I've heard about those ancestry websites, but this sounds way more advanced. How does it work?
Okay, imagine this. We take a DNA sample from our John Doe, maybe from his remains, maybe even a piece of clothing he was wearing, and then we compare that DNA to these huge online databases, the ones used for genealogy, like GED Match or Family Tree DNA.
And these databases can actually help us identify him. Tell me how.
It's all about finding connections, even if they're distant. Think of it like building a family tree, but in reverse. We start with our John Doe's DNA and look for matches, people who share a significant amount of genetic material.
Okay, so we find these matches. Then what?
Those matches might be third cousins, second cousins once removed, maybe even more distant, but it gives us a place to start.
I'm starting to see how this works. We're basically playing a giant game of connect the dots.
Exactly. Each DNA match is a new lead, a new branch on that family tree. We start tracing those family lines, working back through generations, until hopefully we can identify a direct relative, someone who can tell us who this man was.
That's amazing. You hear about this technology being used to solve cold cases, but to think it might help identify someone who's been nameless for over 50 years, that's incredible. But I can imagine this type of investigation can't be cheap.
You're right, genetic genealogy can be pretty expensive.
So realistically, how much are we talking for a case like this?
It varies, of course, but a typical case could cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, sometimes even more.
Wow, that's a serious chunk of change.
It is, and that's a challenge a lot of law enforcement agencies face. They're often working with very limited budgets, so they really have to prioritize their cases. Genetic genealogy is an amazing tool, but it's not always accessible to everyone who needs it.
It's kind of disheartening, like we have these incredible tools that could bring closure to so many families, but then there's the reality of it. Not every agency has the resources to make it happen. Makes you wonder just how many John and Jane Does are out there waiting, hoping for that one break. But okay, let's talk about the agencies that are able to use these advancements. It really is remarkable, isn't it? So back to our John Doe, Namus, UP 395. What's the takeaway from his case specifically?
I think it highlights the stark contrast between how investigations were done back then in 72 and what we can do now. The methods in 1972, they may have worked against him, but his DNA, it's been preserved all these years. That could be the key, the key to finally putting a name to his face.
Hmm.
It really shows you how far we've come.
So there's still hope, even after all this time.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And, it brings up another point that I find really interesting. It's about these cases and how sometimes it's not just about technology.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, sometimes what we really need is a human connection.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it. There's someone out there somewhere who might have a piece of the puzzle, the missing piece to this man's story. An old photo tucked away in an attic, a conversation they overheard years ago about a relative who just disappeared. Maybe it's a name or a place, something they don't even realize is important until they hear it.
You're right. It could be the smallest detail that makes all the difference.
Ex-
And that's why it's so important, everyone listening. If anything in our deep dive today, anything at all, sparked a memory, please don't brush it off. It doesn't matter how small or insignificant you think it might be. Contact NEMUs. Their contact info is on the website. You might just be the one to help solve this case. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We started today in 1972 Las Vegas. It feels like a world away, but then this man's story, it reminds us that some things, they transcend time. And behind every unidentified person, there's a life lived, a family maybe still searching, a mystery waiting to be solved. And maybe, just maybe, someone listening holds the key.